Hello, everyone. My name is Baiden, and my project is entitled Immersive Learning at the Border, Development and Assessment of the Border Studies Program with BU Center on Forced Displacement. First, I would like to provide a bit of context about this issue. Why do we need a program? Why does this matter? Why is this something we're addressing in the university setting? To start, monthly migrant encounters at the border are near record highs. Encounters can refer to either expulsions, when migrants are deported, or detentions, when migrants are taken to detention centers. And these centers typically have abysmal conditions like overcrowding, inadequate resources and care, and family separation. Exemplifying this, migrant encounters more than doubled in the southwest border sectors in 2021. During the pandemic, most of these migrant encounters resulted in expulsions under Title 42, which was a pandemic-era policy started by Donald Trump and continued by Joe Biden that allows immigration control to turn back hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers without recognizing their human right to file asylum claims. This policy is still in effect months after pandemic restrictions have been lifted, though it is thought to end May 11th, finally. For those who are detained, 1 out of 3 is a minor. Children are regularly being taken into these detention centers. The situation at the border is ongoing, and it affects countless refugees and asylum seekers. The humanitarian implications of this are crucial for academic institutions to engage with. This leads us to the development of the Border Studies program. This is an immersive educational experience geared towards driven, passionate students. It has 3 prongs. The first of these is the development of an academic course curriculum through the BU Hub. The second is travel to the US-Mexico border. This is the immersive portion of the program. And the third is project development, which this year was through the BU Refugee Challenge held by the Build Lab. The Hub course portion of this program is a course that meets weekly. Every week has a themed lesson focused on really building knowledge about this context from the ground up. When I was building the syllabus for this, I was really focused on collecting engaging materials that were also an appropriate workload for a Hub course, which is a pass-fail course and has 0 credits. I was also really focused on collecting different interdisciplinary materials for nuanced understanding, and that was geared to people of all different interests and learning styles. For this, we collected poetry, we included art and videos, we included essays, and we also supplemented this with the occasional academic literature piece. The goal of this was to really build a foundation of knowledge for people of all different knowledge levels before leaving for the travel component of the program. So the travel component was a week-long curriculum over spring break in March. The first few days of the program was really focused on hands-on learning in volunteer centers. This really brought up a lot of questions of ethics. Was it ethical for us to be spending our break in these centers volunteering? Questions of impact. Were we really making impact by spending one day in these centers? And also challenging our own perceptions. What assumptions were we walking into these centers with that we had to leave at the door? The next few days of the program were focused on an academic conference at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. This brought up questions of discipline and roles. We met with various professionals, academics, volunteers, and researchers that were working on tackling this problem from different angles. It was very clear that the scope of the issue was massive. But there were also so many different people trying to make a difference from all different angles, and it became clear that the best way to work on tackling this problem is to focus on your own passions and skill sets and know you're not alone. If you're really addressing this problem from one angle, you know that your neighbor is bringing something different to that. And we saw that in our team as well. We had international relations majors, we had journalism majors, we had people working on data science and computing. We really had representation from various focuses of study. The final few days of the program focused on engagement with the landscape and the ecosystem. We visited the National Butterfly Center, which was a nature preserve on the border where multiple United States administrations, including the Biden administration, have tried to take land and build the wall. We actually saw in person a construction team hired by Joe Biden to continue building of the wall. We also toured the wall. We saw walls built by the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. And what was really striking was these walls were all different heights. It was very clear that this wall was incredibly symbolic. If one part of the wall was too high, they just moved to the other part and it was much shorter and easier to climb. It wasn't really affecting the implementation of policy so much as what it was saying about the policy, the message it was sending to the world. It also said a lot about the role of government versus private individuals, which unshockingly, there's a massive power imbalance. We also learned the impact on the land and local communities. There were parts where the wall was going through grave sites and other community fixtures. The wall was built 10 miles in from the actual physical or the actual map border, which was interesting because you saw communities that were on one side of the wall, technically in US territory, but they had to cross through the wall every day to get to work. They were separated from the rest of the United States. We also saw how much walls were political tools. When we were at the river, one side of the riverbank looked completely different from the other side. These walls were really imagined. After this trip, we had a better sense of the way forward. This brought us to the development of the Refugee Challenge. The goal of the Refugee Challenge was to create an intervention to welcome refugees to Boston. We decided to address issues of language and community for our pitch, and we came up with the idea Intercambio, which was a web program with the goals of language development, cultural disconnect, and facilitating integration. We had a 3-step model, modules, a questionnaire to match people with, and we finally would connect college students with a refugee with similar interests. We created a mock-up of the site. We got to second place out of 35 pitches. And even though we had a tangible product, at the end of the day, we really learned about how to create a sustainable, scalable, impactful intervention that would give us real-world skills. This program does not end with the academic year. We're going to be continuing research on immersive learning programs, determining the best possible framework for these programs, and exploring questions of scaling, in addition to applying lessons to other projects. I would like to thank, before I open it up to questions, my border studies peers and the Intercambio team, Chandra, who took the beautiful photos that you saw in this presentation, the CFD team, who has really been an integral support during my undergraduate career, and finally, Dr. Preston. Your support has meant so much, and you are such a great role model, and I'm very fortunate to have you as my advisor.
Hey, Baiden, that was really nice. I've learned a lot, which is the theme of the day. I'm curious about the data you showed on the slide where you introduced the incarceration of the minors.
Yes.
So there's a big dip in the middle that I'm sure you're aware of between 2019 and 2020. So where that takes a nosedive, this is the beginning of the pandemic?
Yes, so
okay.
We saw that...
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I apologize.
So I'm just, but how much of the data collection was impacted by the pandemic? And you might not know that, but there were so many things that were so badly affected, right? And I'm just curious if that has come up at all, because obviously so much of what's going on does depend on these data, but I've been wondering about that. So anyway, thanks.
That is a really good question. I do know that migration to the border was severely impacted during this time. I, to be honest, don't know much about how much the data collection was impacted. I would imagine that it was severely impacted. So I do imagine that although there were lower numbers of migrants, that the figures may not be as accurate as post and pre-pandemic times.
Thank you so much for sharing the context and insights from so many different parts of this program. I'd love to hear if there was anything that your perspective shifted on after going to the border? I'm sure there were multiple things, but perhaps you can talk through one example and how that shaped the work that you were doing for the challenge.
There's so many things to pick from. This week was very impactful in changing perceptions. I know there were 12 of us that participated, and one topic of conversation that came up in a lot of our debriefing sessions was the fact that we kind of came into this imagining the asylum seekers and migrants we would meet would be very jaded, that they would be angry, that they would be, not very happy to see people come through volunteering. We just kind of had this impression that the migrants would be very, unhappy and upset after they took this journey to the United States, which, they have gone through unimaginable trauma. They certainly were affected in ways that we can't even comprehend, but through it all, they kept very brave faces, and they kept their humanity, and they, really approached everything with such a grace and with such dignity and strength, and we're so grateful to be with their families. And it really kind of was humbling to interact with these asylum seekers in that way. All right, thank you all very much.